I just wanted to add, rather than really making a speech, I just want to spend a couple of minutes on emphasizing on a couple of points that Sir Alden mentioned. That is a proposal of negotiations and a peaceful manner to resolve this issue. Because the military option never will happen, and if it ever, God forbid, happens, you're talking about a regional war and maybe World War III. So this stick will never stick. So the carrot and stick thing is one thing that I honestly believe that sometimes the stick is being used too much rather than the carrot. By Netanyahu coming in here and getting 27 standing ovation in our Congress, basically ready to go and bomb Iran, doesn't help. You can't, and on top of that, you can't have preconditions to negotiations. Preconditions, if you do all of this, then we'll sit down and talk. What is the talk about then? If I've agreed to everything, why should we sit down to verify and make it formal that we have agreed to everything that you wanted us to do? So to us, really, there should be no precondition to any kind of negotiations, and the stick should be pretty much, for the time being, put under the bed, and we should start talking logic based on mutual understanding and mutual respect. And rather than going through, and on the nuclear-free zone and the security issue, as Sir Alden said, you know, we had an organization called the CENTO, if you remember, that was between Iraq, Pakistan, Iran, and some of the others that had basically the same concept of guaranteeing each other's securities and all that. That kind of a form of CENTO can be implemented for this guarantee of security of all the Middle Eastern countries within that region. So rather than repeating some of the things that Sir Alden has said, I always find the question and answer part of the discussion is the most interesting. So I will stop at this point and we'll listen to some of the questions the audience have, and hopefully we'll learn from each other.
Well, we have some excellent questions here. If any of you would still like to ask a question, just wave your hand, and there's someone in the back with a question. Somebody will come and get it and bring it up. But let's just cut to the quick. Here's one that I think gets right to it. Will there be a war?
I hope not. I think the chances are less than 15%. There are some circumstances in which the Israelis might try to go it alone, but I think their chiefs of staff have now told Netanyahu that the cost would be far too great and that the consequences would be terrible. And further, it could not put back the Iranian program more than a couple of years at the best. So, not likely, possible, hope not. Fred, what is your thought?
My thoughts is the same, but basically even more optimistic than 15%. I would say almost nil. Because if it ever happens, as I said, you're looking at possibly the Third World War. Second is that it's really Netanyahu, not so much Israel. Netanyahu, when he says he's going to bomb and all that, right now Iranians have been smart enough to build some of those facilities so deep and in the middle of populated areas, as Sir Alden mentioned, that to penetrate them, they don't have any capability whatsoever. The deep penetrating missiles, the only country that has them is the United States. Either the United States has to do that directly or give those deep penetrating missiles to Israel, which I don't think, as long as at least Obama is in power, he will not allow that to happen.
Let me ask one of the candidates in the Republican primary, Ron Paul, I think suggested that why is America so obsessed with an Iranian nuclear weapon? Lots of countries have them, some seemingly even more unstable, like Pakistan and North Korea. Korea. And is it because of the threat to Israel? What is it that makes the potential for a nuclear weapon in Iran so untenable?
Yeah. You're right, the North Koreans are more advanced in prospective nuclear weapons than Iran. And of course Pakistan is more unstable. However, the United States has suffered two enormous humiliations in Iran. One, of course, was the hostages crisis, which has been with us for a long time and is now in movies. And secondly, Iran does represent the possibility of the whole Gulf going up in flames. And so it is Saudi Arabia, as well as Israel, that is twisting the arm of the United States. And I think the influence of both is diminishing. One of the little essays in our book considers the relationship between Israel and the United States, which is close. But it is not quite as it was before. And so the Israeli influence through the enormous and effective Jewish community in the United States is slightly diminishing. And that's why Fred is probably near the mark in thinking there will be less war. But it has to be recognized that both Saudi and Israel have special political influences in the United States. And coupled with the embarrassments that we've suffered over the years, I think they're the primary reasons why there's this great sensitivity about Iran.
Fred, anything?
Ditto to what Sir Adam says, so we give time for other questions.
Okay, here's another question. What is Iran's main complaint vis-a-vis Israel? Not territorial, not religious. What is it?
Well, you know, the roots all go back to the Palestinian issue. And you've seen, I watched, you know, being one of those political junkies, one night I stayed up all night watching the Senate session for 6 hours when they were interrogating our Secretary of Defense, to be Hagel. And the thing was that they would go, some of the senators would go back to asking him that 20-some years ago he said that the Israelis are treating the Palestinians like animals in shelters. In essence, let's be honest about it. I mean, Israel need to be secure 100%, and the United States should guarantee that security. There's no question about that. If Israel is in danger, we should go and defend them. We have a moral obligation because of the Second World War and the Holocaust and all of that. And we have an obligation because of the regional issues relating that that's really the only solid friend that we have in the middle of a group of countries that are not that stable. So, going back to the question, it really, the root is all in the Palestinian issue. And the same way that the Iranians have played the game of debt to America, debt to America, debt to America after 34 years, that's what keeps them alive. That is what keeping the regime alive. The day that they say, okay, people are going to start asking about the economy, about other things. Now they love the sanctions. The people on top are not hurting. It's the common people that are hurting. They're busy making a living. The same thing with Israel. Israel intentionally wants to keep this fire alive and burning because they feel their existence a lot depends on having this issue of the differences alive. The Camp David Accord was the biggest thing that ever happened. But what did that do? Not really that much. So I think part of it is intentional on the part of Israel to keep the issue ongoing for it to keep its superiority within the region.
Okay, well, with that kind of discouraging assessment, that this question I think dovetails well with it. Based on the administration's policy of prevention and not containment, is there really sufficient time to implement your laudable options? Will the Israelis accept a nuclear Iran? If you walk in Israel's shoes for a while, the future appears to be fraught with limited options.
Agreed. It's worth remembering, of course, that historically the Jewish population was better treated by the Persian emperors than anybody else. Remember, it was in fact Cyrus the Great emperor, who liberated the Jews from Babylon and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. And it was Darius the Great, the next emperor, who helped them to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, provided the funds for that. So there's never been an enormous hostility between the two. The question of whether...
Ahmadinejad's rhetoric knows that.
Of course, Ahmadinejad has made his political living by threatening to wipe Zionism off the map of the Middle East. By the way, if you look at the Persian, he never actually said that he would wipe out Israel. The enemy was Zionism, the idea that somehow or other the Zionist creed had rights there. And his case was, it was the Germans who started this by trying to wipe out the Jews. And it was the Russians who continued it in the Soviet Union, again trying to wipe out many of the Jews. They created the problem of Zionist Israel coming into the Palestine area, and therefore the Germans and the Russians should be responsible for looking after this problem rather than Iraq. That's what he actually said, but of course the way it has worked out, he's become an existential threat to Israel. If I were an Israeli, and I've spent a lot of time there, I certainly would be anxious. But one thing is important to say, and I'd like to say this with circumspection. We, meaning the United States, to some extent the Brits, know a great deal about what is going on in the sites in Israel. And we do so because our present level of knowledge in cyber space is extremely good. And we do know pretty well exactly what is happening. Not entirely, but we know a great deal. And that was one of the reasons why Obama was able to say to Netanyahu when he was here, take it easy, because we in fact have a great deal of knowledge, and so we shall know better than we do at present when and if the Iranians come close to being able to enrich enough uranium to create a warhead. We know and need to know how long it would take to weaponize it, because uranium's a difficult stuff. You have to miniaturize it, put it into the head of a missile, and then you have to test it. And our knowledge of that through not just Stuxnet's, but all of the other cyber work that we're doing is very extensive. And so I think we can say to the Israelis, walking in their shoes, we understand your anxiety, but we think we know a little bit more than you do about what's actually happening.
Well, you know, I honestly sympathize with Israel being concerned about a nuclear Iran. But if you look at the area without really, you know, taking side, Iran is the only country that's surrounded by nuclear countries. Nuclear countries that have the least amount of protection and control over their nuclear. I've read articles in the Economist that sometimes the Pakistanis carry some of the uraniums in pickup truck across the streets from one place to the other. That can get into the hands of terrorists and all that. That's one thing. That Iran is surrounded by nuclear countries. Pakistan, Russia, China, I mean, on and on, Israel. But that is not justification for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and I'm not for it at all. But consider the unspeakable. What if Iran had a nuclear weapon? To me, sometimes the argument is, big deal. You mean it's more dangerous for Iran to have a nuclear weapon than Pakistan having it transported across the street, or North Korea? I mean, just think of the unspeakable. Okay, we are at the day that Iran has a nuclear weapon. Israel, they can't have 1,000 nuclear weapons in one overnight. Israel already has 300 plots. The United States then can say, the first time any of your missiles go up in the air before it even leaves the waters or the lands of Iran, it'll be destroyed. So having a nuclear weapon is not a monstrous thing that we think. As Sir Alvin said, having uranium at 3.4% for energy, at 20% for medical, and at 90% for nuclear weapons, just having the 90% ain't going to give you a nuclear bomb. You're at least 5 to 10 years away from building the missiles, installing it, and being able to send that missile directly enough to some place without being hit before it even reaches its destiny. So having a nuclear weapon by itself is not that easy. And secondly, what if it had one? It's not that big a deal if you really think about it.
A lot of people must not be thinking about it because it seems to be
It's just a hype.
yeah.
To be honest,
Right.
it's a hype.
Another question, we say, and I think we means the United States, we say all options are on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Under that threat, why wouldn't Iran race to level the playing field and develop nuclear weapons?
I can't enter into the mind of the Ayatollahs, maybe their shoes, but not their minds. Certainly the fact that they are threatened from without, and on one side you've got Pakistan, China, India with nuclears, to the north you've got Russia, to the west you've got the NATO weapons. Of course that's a factor in their thinking. I'm afraid I'm for no nuclear weapons, and I'd like to see arrangements made whereby we gradually work down the levels of nuclear weapons as the Non-Proliferation Treaty requires us to do. And that really should be reaffirmed. So I can understand the Iranians' response, and it's one of the reasons why I'd rather reduce the threat level and start the diplomatic process. And the sooner we get going on that, the better. We're due to start, by the way, in Almaty, the capital of Kazakhstan, on I think February the 20th. And there will be a negotiation which hopefully will not just look at the nuclears, but look at all the other issues that are separating the West from Iran.
Anything you wanted to add?
No, I think.
Okay. Well, your diplomatic solution sounds wonderful. How do you get there? Particularly, how do you get there? I mean, you talk about a nuclear-free zone in the entire Middle East, when it seems the rhetoric and the political reality in this country and in the Middle East is if anything, more contentious now than in the past. Netanyahu may have had a close call, but his regime has been in charge for a long time, and Israeli public opinion seems to, while there's still a significant peace movement, it's been weakened. And in the other surrounding countries, they seem more polarized. Our own politics seems even more strident. So how can we get there? It seems to be a very laudable and perhaps sensible solution, but one that's politically impossible.
Fear is the great problem. The fear on all sides, really, of being attacked and destroyed by the other. But you see, I'm old enough, and I think a few of our friends here are old enough to remember that at the height of the Cold War, the expectation was that war between the superpowers was almost inevitable. The Soviet Union was building up tens of thousands of nuclear hydrogen weapons. The United States had even more. And by the way, neither side were looking after them very well. There's a table in the book that shows that our actual arrangements for safeguarding our nuclears are not all that good. But during that Cold War period, all of us feared that there would be war. There has not been war. And why? Partly because of change within the Soviet Union itself, from Stalin to Khrushchev to the present arrangements, which are less bad. Partly because of change within the Western nations, including the United States. And so the reality is this, that we had the fear that it was inevitable It's not proved it at all. We have worked our way out of the likely nuclear exchange and the nuclear winter, as you may remember. It has not happened. It does not have to happen with Iran.
Your thoughts, Fred?
Well, no further comment on that particular issue, but just as a follow-up on what I said, I don't want to scare anybody by saying, so what? But if they had a nuclear weapon. But you need to really think about it, that when Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it's going to be so primitive for so many years that I hope by the time they have the capabilities that Israel has, that regime wouldn't even exist. So that's one of my hopes. But when you come to negotiation and talk, listen, Nixon went to China on the ping pong policy went and met with Mao. I mean, unheard of. Reagan went and met with Gorbachev at a situation when we were at the height of our difficulties with the Soviet Union. So negotiation is something that you can have. You have negotiation with your enemies because you have a difference. Otherwise, you wouldn't be enemies. So you negotiate with your enemies. While hundreds of our kids were being killed in Vietnam, granted, we talked about a month about, I remember, about the shape of the table in Paris, but finally they decided on the shape of the table and who sits there. And while we were killing each other, the United States and Vietnamese were talking in Paris. So talk is the very first step that can open up possibilities. And those possibilities come from by talking and understanding each other's sides. And this carrot and stick, and having a little bit of a carrot and a big stick ain't going to work, because that's intimidating. We got to say, when we say, what, military action is not off the table, we got to say that's a standard statement. You never say anything off the table when you got an issue. So, but we got to say we are willing to sit down and really listen. The United States says we are willing to talk, but on the nuclear issue. The Iranians say that's the only issue we don't have any interest to talk to you about. We want to talk about billions of dollars of money that has been blockaded by the United States in the Western nations. We want to talk about the other things. So the agenda should be open. There should not be preconditions. And the way you talk, you sit down with your enemies and bite your finger and talk and come to a conclusion on a pragmatic way, in a way that you can really understand the other side's position, and hopefully you come to a peaceful solution.
To expand on that idea of changing attitudes, perhaps with the three of us sitting up here, we can remember typewriters and rotary phones, so we're not the best ones to address this. But what about the whole social media revolution and the impact that's had on the Arab Spring? Is that a hopeful sign? Is that likely to, over time, change attitudes, perhaps cause a move toward a more peaceful resolution of things?
Rick, to deal with the Arab Spring would require at least 2 or 3 more World Affairs Council dinners. Many of us were excited when it began, with the overturn of 4 successive despots all the way from Gaddafi to Egypt to Yemen and so on. And there are those who hope that what's happening in Syria is the latest aspect of the Arab Spring. I don't take that view. I think the Arab Spring was a spasm of hope, and we certainly were delighted that it happened. But it has not turned into the series of law-abiding, Western-minded democracies that we imagined. On the contrary, it's turned out to be a very unstable and chaotic result. What will happen is difficult to judge. Tunis is the best bet, Libya is coming on, Egypt is all over the place. So I don't believe that the notion that somehow or other there'll be an Arab Spring in Iran is the way it's going to go. The Iranians will do it their way, and I keep emphasizing they're not Arabs. The Arabs took over a large part of Iran in the Middle Ages, but the basic Iranians are not essentially Arabs, they're different. So I think the notion that will be the equivalent of an Arab Spring in Iran, it is possible. Certainly the Iranian people are fed up with the regime, they like to see it fail. But I think they're more likely to do that if we remove the threat and take away from the Ayatollahs the ability to say that everything is America's fault.
I wasn't suggesting the Arab Spring in that. I was using Arab Spring as an example of social media and the impact that it can have. And that is that just naive? Or is in fact, you have younger people now who are more multicultural and they talk on Facebook and things like that, and they have a little different view of the world. And while they perhaps, one argument might be that movement was co-opted in the Arab Spring, that eventually those that were co-opted will still be alive, and those that did the co-opting will be dead, or will those that were co-opted get old and turn into the people that co-opted them? So I guess you could, you argue it either way, but do you have any thoughts?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm glad that we are not overlooking that very important issue, which is the communication and ways of sending messages and all that. And that was in Congressman Ed Royce's letter. I had a long discussion with him. He really is a true believer. Let me give you an example. Voice of America is the most popular and listened to station in all of Iran. Isn't it true? Even here in the United States, people like Mrs. Abbasati, by having a magazine with that kind of a broad-based distribution, have fantastic, informative information in it that the diaspora can have access to and read about things. So, I mean, I've been on Voice of America a couple of times, 3, 4, 5 times. Every time I'm on Voice of America, I get 10 telephone calls from Iran. Hey, we saw you on TV, had a nice time, kind of thing. So people are listening.
You do have a nice time.
Oh, okay. People are listening to what Voice of America says. They don't listen to their own TVs. They listen to what they hear in Voice of America. They are as aware as we are about the everyday things that happen here in the United States and around the world. So communication in that respect, and of course the new Facebook and Twitter and this and that is doing wonders. And that brings me to the fact that Obama made the biggest mistake of not really supporting that, what they call the Green Movement. Not that I agree with those guys, because they're the same guys. They're all the same, essentially. But at least if we had supported that movement, something could have come out of it, which would have been really a much better thing for Iran, and not necessarily Mousavi or Karoumi, because Mousavi was the prime minister during his regime. Hundreds of people were shot and killed. So they're all the same. They talk different stories. They pretend to be different, but they're all the same kind of believing in their religious, theocratic, Islamic Republic kind of thing. Don't believe them. But by supporting a movement like that, which we stayed away from, was a big mistake, and I hope we won't make that mistake again. And if there is some kind of uprising, very overtly, the United States should send a message that for those who are after freedom, democracy, human rights, we will support you in any way you want, and tell us what you want, rather than hiding behind the scenes and waiting to see what happens.
Okay, I think we are out of time except for any closing observation you would like to make, Sir
But what we've been trying to do is to peer into the future, and that's exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. The suggestions that we have made of a non-aggression pact in the Gulf, and then gradually the spread of a nuclear-free zone to include Israel and Iran with proper inspection against a NATO guarantee. These are large suggestions. They won't happen overnight, but I think they're now part of the pudding in negotiation, and it will take some time. You're right about the new technologies, which are far more effective on younger people. But I'd like to close with a remark that was made to me by one of the greatest men I've ever met, Albert Einstein. When he came to New York from Germany, he spoke very little English. And I met him when he came off the boat in New York, and he was doing a great dinner at the Waldorf Astoria. And then he went down to Princeton. And I interviewed him. I think I might have been the last person to interview him for Time magazine before he died. And Einstein, who knew about all these technologies that are emerging, and who'd given great thought to the future of the world, and was concerned about his contribution to the nuclear atomic business. He said to me, as I get older, he said, life does not become more intelligible, it becomes more mysterious. And I think that's about right. We don't know what is going to happen, but if we have any sense, we will try to make it peaceful and not by war.
Thank you.
This brings us to the end of the program, and thank you for watching, and until next show, I wish you the best.